Welcome to the Infra Insider podcast from Infra-Be, a leader in renewable energy and infrastructure executive search. Join us as we dive into insightful conversations with industry leaders, pioneers and visionaries shaping the future of infrastructure and renewable energy. Discover the latest trends and innovations and challenges driving the transition towards a greener and more resilient future. Please remember to like and subscribe. Welcome back to the Infra Insider, the podcast where we explore the people, the ideas and innovations shaping the future of infrastructure. Today, we're diving into one of the most dynamic and fast-moving sectors in the market right now, electric vehicle charging. I'm joined by Neil Broadbank from Raw Charging, a company at the forefront of premium EV charging infrastructure, working with some of the UK and Europe's most recognisable destinations and real estate. Neil brings a fascinating career journey across infrastructure, energy and mobility, and today we'll be unpacking not just his story, but also major shifts happening across the EV landscape, from investment and rollout, challenges to what's coming next. We'll also be discussing, and you have to wait until the end for this, Raw Charging's latest announcement, which could signal an incredibly important step forward in how EV infrastructure integrates with the built environment. Neil, it's wonderful to have you on. We've been talking about this for far too long, but you've been too busy building out EV infrastructure. But I'm delighted that we've finally carved out some time. I was joking that we've colour-coded for autumn. I think I've colour-coded. I've just realised with the seat that you're on at the moment, that wasn't intentional. But no, it's lovely. It's lovely to have you on.
Hi, Daniel.
Obviously, yeah. So no, great to have you on. Look, we are at heart, although we are, all about reporting news across the market. At the core of what we do is finding the best professionals across the market, and therefore the most important thing to us selfishly is learning about people's career history. So I always like to start off by that. Neil, you've had quite an interesting career across infrastructure and energy. What were the key moments that led into the EV charging space, and what made you realise or maybe still trying to realise that this was going to become such a defining sector?
Yeah, hi Daniel. It's the best dressed podcasters as well. So no, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
No, it's an interesting way to start. I think energy and infrastructure technology is so dynamic and evolving and adapting, and EV charging, the industry even more so, really. So from my perspective, I guess a few things were ingrained in me from an early age. I suppose on the one hand, I grew up in quite an entrepreneurial family within a small kind of machinery business, not out of choice, but over time, perhaps I developed, an awareness, an appreciation for the dynamic nature of business, how industry can evolve and change, the peaks, the troughs of business growth, or sometimes lack of it, perhaps. So quite boom and bust in that respect, but always sort of a feeling of evolution. And then on the other hand, we also moved to a farm when I was about, I think it was 9 years old. And living on the farm gave me, a deep respect and passion for the natural environment. So from as simple as having an appreciation for, the changing weather patterns, and I guess looking back on it now in the early 2000s, the increasing discourse of climate change being mentioned, at school and in the news. So I think I had this curiosity for this kind of overarching theme that was going to be affecting our lives in the years to come. And I had a natural curiosity for perhaps, renewable energy and the technologies within that. So, and funnily, by chance, my mum and dad were approached by renewable developers to build wind and solar farms on our family farm.
Amazing.
So, yeah, naturally,
Not surprised though. I was waiting for you to say that, actually.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess I think that also comes with being from Cornwall, where that was where a lot of the sort of the focus was being placed, because it's, you know, it's a perfect environment for for daylight hours as well as wind, being very coastal. But I naturally got involved with those developments. So yeah, that was a really kind of nice, interesting experience to get involved with, you know, what ultimately was kind of this global shift of kind of energy transition, and getting to see it firsthand. So that really piqued my interest. And I think fast forwarding, after I finished my, I guess, climate change focused geography degree at university, I joined a small energy firm, a renewable energy firm called Raw Energy, funnily enough, as a fresh-faced graduate. And really, I had the intention to develop out more of those major infrastructure projects, but it was right at the height, post-feed-in tariff, and right at the
Yeah.
height of Brexit. So all that kind of policy ambiguity around tariffs being at certain levels really started to kind of loosen the certainty around those investment profiles. And what that culminated in was me having enough time within the business to look at other
Mm.
things. And EV charging was that thing that I really started to look into it at a lot of detail. And in 2018, eventually we ideated certain business models and co-founded Raw Charging, putting personal investment, borrowing friends and family investment at the time, and spinning it out. Fast forwarding today, you know, we're majority owned by one of the world's leading infrastructure investment firms, and operating one of the UK's leading charging networks.
That's that's quite a story, isn't it? So from milking cows to charging cars, although I'm sure you weren't quite doing that. But it's interesting. So, you know, there is nothing more resilient than a farmer. And so it sounds like those early years of growing up around it with your parents, you know, you probably saw what it took to make something successful. And no doubt that kind of grew the drive that you have today. I love speaking about people's childhoods because it often does shape who they become.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And for better or worse, you know, we're all a product of parents, or perhaps, you know, a more refined version. But no, I love sort of the upbringing that I had. And you know, there's a lot of grit and hard work that comes with that sort of agricultural background as well. So I think that serves you well in a sort of dynamic industry, in the one that we're in, where, you know, there is a lot of diversification and innovation.
Yeah, that there is. The charging space has obviously, you know, evolved rapidly over the last few years from that early adoption to serious infrastructure build out. There's obviously a lot to do. What do you see has been the biggest shift in the sector over the last sort of, you know, 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think it just seems to be in a mode of hyper acceleration, certainly amongst the charge point operators. So I think the charge point operators that are excelling and sort of stretching out across what is effectively initially a large marketplace. I think the people with their core identities in place are really doubling down on it. So you've got your en route players, you've got your, yeah, such as your motorway operators, GridServe, Instavolt, perhaps Tesla. And then you've got other segment experts like us, for example, where we're focusing on our niche of destination charging. So everyone has their strategy in a kind of very clear profile, and are looking to execute, you know, certain scale over periods of time. And I think beneath that, there's essentially a leveling of the playing field between the
Mm.
operators. So even the earlier market leaders that I've just mentioned, they are sort of being caught up, whether it be on a technical level, whether it be on a site acquisition level, which is great for the millions of drivers that are yet to transition to EV, because it's just giving a general certainty. At an operator level, yeah, there was that land acquisition focus in the early days, like with many sort of industries that are in the formative days. Now it's much more about utilization. It's about profitability. It's about
Mm.
long-term resilience, and how drivers get a consistent experience everywhere for a fair price.
Yeah, and do you see a lot more consolidation coming in the market as well?
For sure. Obviously, we've seen it kicked off recently with the likes of BV and Mer. I think you've only got to look across to perhaps similar infrastructure industries such as telco or fiber, where ultimately scale results in more efficient leverage of large networks and economies of scale, whether it be to do with energy buying and procurement or larger customer bases that can be leveraged, such as data and so on. What is different to some of those industries, perhaps, is there's a real divergence of not only energy and infrastructure, but also technology with transport and OEMs. So you've got these different players. So it's really going to be interesting to see how it evolves. But no, there's some similarities there with consolidation in other industries
So watch this space.
for sure.
So, I mean, there's always a lot of hype around EVs. Always has been, and I think it continues. Um, but I feel like there's been quite a lot of skepticism around adoption rates and infrastructure readiness. From your perspective, where's the reality today versus the narrative?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, I think it's a sign that the industry is getting the right focus. If these types of polarizing narratives are sort of put up there, it's certainly one that's moving. I would say there's definitely been a mismatch between the narrative and reality, and it's been covered by some very significant figures in our industry already. But there is already a sufficient supply of charging infrastructure for EVs, and actually that should give drivers who are yet to transition to electric much more confidence that charging is just a part of this, and they should really just get on with it. Perhaps buy their second
Yeah,
EV if they've already got their first. Perhaps transitioning to a plug-in hybrid. That might seem like a logical step, but having driven an EV myself for nearly 7 years now, you don't look back. So I think the one of the narrative pieces that the challenge isn't just more charges, it's putting them in the right locations at the right speed and with the right reliability, because there has been a lot of installation over a period of time, and we touched on consolidation earlier. I think with the with less players doing a quality job, it's only going to help the confidence for a greater
mm.
transition over time.
Yeah. I mean, there's still a massive need for them. I've also got two EV cars. I'm 3 years in. I've got to say the first 12 months were a little bit hairy, and even pulling over to some, service stations in strong locations, pulling in to find four slow chargers. But every time I do pull in, I can see how much the sector has to grow. That there's a lot of potential there. Still, maybe I'll send you the list of those service stations that let me down. See if you can do
We'll take
anything
a look.
about. See if you can do anything about it. But I mean, raw charging. You've carved out a very distinctive position. You know, we can't help but notice that, and particularly around premium destinations and partnerships. What's the strategy behind that? And why does that segment matter so much?
Yeah, that's fair to say. We and very early on in our journey, we realized there was always going to be plenty of purpose-built, dedicated hub locations out there, and they required a lot of capital to get going and much more of a kind of build it and they will come mentality, of which is certainly bearing fruit to today for others. But we took a very deliberate position around destination charging, where rather than building standalone sites from day one, we've focused on partnering with some of the UK's largest retail, leisure, hospitality players, positioning ourselves ultimately over time as a leading player in that space, building charging infrastructure in places where people are spending time. They're already spending time there,
Mhm.
and I guess that gives us that's two kind of clear pillars for the success of our network over the long term, and we're really clear about that as an organization. So firstly, there is just built-in demand. We're not just relying on passing traffic. We'll take it opportunistically where we can, and obviously that comes as part of roaming partnerships through our network and drivers out and about, because we do have a lot of strategically located hub sites within our network. But actually, secondly, with that built-in demand, we can also double down with the brands that we're partnering with. There's significant unique brand association with the likes of the National Trust, with the likes of Aberdeen, who have a bunch of retail parks in key parts within London, and other premium destination brands such as the Royal Horticultural Society. And when you partner with these locations, you do inherit the trust and loyalty of their customer bases, or the existing profiles and existing footfall habits that people have had for locations for a long period of time. But you must treat that existing customer base with the respect it deserves, and that flows right through kind of into our charging thesis. There's a lot of responsibility when you're turning up to a location that already has an existing profile. Even from the very early development stages, you got to make sure that you're not disrupting things at Christmas because there's a construction project going on, for example. Right through to the Easter holidays, when it might be peak time for footfall. How does the flow of the charging journey happen in the most seamless way? But destination charging is definitely our sector, really.
So location for you is probably the most important thing, and that's how you is that how you lead every decision?
Yeah, location and footfall.
How do you do the due diligence on that?
Yeah, so I think
You don't sit in a car park just counting right, 10 car.
No, I think with all of these analysis processes, there's a cross section of interpretation, right? And we ground everything in as much data as we can get, right down from the kind of contextual area within which a site sits. So standard demographic assumptions based around, okay, well, who might have EVs today, with or without parking spaces that might need to charge locally. But actually, when you layer that destination lens over the top of that, people are traveling to these sites from further away. So let's take a National Trust site next to a beach in Cornwall. That might have a seasonal profile where there's a certain demographic that would travel there in the summer versus the winter, and we take that into our utilization assessment, into our business planning. So, being private equity owned, we're kept very honest with how granular and scientific we approach our site selection, right through to the number and speed of charges that we put in.
So you guys are all about hotels, retail, and leisure.
That's right. Yeah.
Those are the primary focuses. Have you ever got it wrong?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, charging technology mixed with portfolio rollout is and has been an evolving feat. So, there are locations in the past where we've elected for one type of technology based on an assumed dwell time profile, and then we've investigated the utilization data and then pivoted the strategy. So that again, with an analytical identity within the business, we look at things very closely to make sure that how we've planned something is executed in the way we want it to be. But we're also very honest and humble about that. So we're okay to expand a site if we believe we've not put enough charges in on day one, and that again comes back to having a really strong relationship with the landlords and with our host partners to bring them into the ideas around our wider plan.
It sounds like landlords are being a lot more open-minded as well, which is probably to how they were maybe sort of 4 or 5 years ago as well. So it sounds like there's a lot of scope for a lot more growth. So it was last week, I think it was last week, there was a very big press announcement from Raw. Can you talk us through what's been announced and what it means for Raw charging, and why actually it's so significant for the wider EV ecosystem?
Absolutely. Yes, and very proud to announce it, really. So we have entered into a 20-year partnership with Landsec. So one of the UK's kind of most prestigious and kind of real estate forces, we like to, associate them with, really. We are effectively delivering one of the largest destination charging rollouts across their 28, 29 retail, leisure, outlet, shopping centre locations, and investing upwards of 24 million to do that. Initially rolling out with 1,000 chargers, so really exciting rollout.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, and very proud to be working with such a forward-thinking organization. They really do have a reputation that sort of precedes them, and just fantastically collaborative, proactive in terms of how we make this much more than just charging. And I guess what makes it significant, if I was going to boil it down, there are a number of things, but firstly, it's just the sheer scale. So the scale of the rollout, 1,000 charges in the first phase, a mixture of slow, rapid, ultra rapid hubs to match the varying dwell times on each site. The scale of the portfolio size, so there's about 40,000 parking spaces within the portfolio, so just ample room for sort of structural forecasted growth for our investors. And then the scale of the customers visiting these sites. So over 20 million visitors a year heading to these sites. And that's an incredible market for an EV charge point operator to create a loyal usage base, because we've seen en route charging hubs, much like Tesla, GridServe, and Instavolt have moved the needle with en route charging, as we've touched on. We're really trying to do that in the destination space with a major rollout like this. And then I think the other thing that makes this quite significant is we're working very closely with the consumer team within Landsec to really optimize the customer experience across kind of all of the different customer segments that visit their locations. So be that people shopping, going to the cinema, or just living in the local area, there's a tremendous opportunity for sort of loyalty within that, which I think is vital for the long-term sustainability of a charge point operator.
Yeah, no, fantastic. It's a great partnership, and I'm sure this is the start of, the journey with them.
Yes, and there's some incredible initiatives that we're working on.
No, fabulous. Well, we're looking forward to seeing how that rolls out. But like you say, I can see why you're so proud of having developed and built up that partnership. And that kind of leads me on to my next thought. We're obviously looking at scaling EV infrastructure, but obviously with scale comes challenges. What are the hardest challenges right now in scaling EV charging? Is it grid capacity? Is it funding? We talked about partnerships, or something else that people are perhaps underestimating.
Yeah, really interesting. I think it's really easy to say the grid, isn't it? It's everything that we're all trying to fix. But no, I quite like this question. So for us, being a destination charge point operator, destinations by their nature are just very unique. Be that one of Landsec's flagship shopping centres, like something like Bluewater, huge individually flagship location, 13,000 parking spaces, just a behemoth. Whether it's something like that, or the Royal Horticultural Society's location like Wisley, a unique garden centre in Surrey, or our car park next to the National Trust location down in Cornwall. The challenge for those unique destinations is, how do you implement a leading, reliable charging solution that has a uniformity to it, but ultimately a bespoke element that is respective to that site and also commensurate with the different dwell times and charging use cases. So for us, doing that at scale is kind of a constant balance, because you need to really enhance the unique elements of these locations that make them special for what they are. People are going there for particular experiences with or without charging. And I think we're really well positioned, and it requires a sort of a unique organizational blend of creativity, innovation, and then discipline to apply some quite bespoke principles to a scaled rollout effectively.
Interesting. Okay. So the grid is the problem.
It doesn't go away, particularly with the National Trust, for example. There's some old properties in rural locations where grid wasn't a thing 200 years ago for sure.
Well, then it's there so that you can feel good about finding a better solution.
Exactly.
They're there to challenge you to say you can feel better when you get to the final outcome. Um, so I always like to predict, look ahead, think about what the future is going to bring for each sector. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, but let's try and look ahead next 3 to 5 years. What does success look like for the EV charging sector? And where do you think raw charging will sit within that future?
Oh, good one. So I think structurally, as an industry, we've already touched on it. Consolidation is already happening. So yeah, that's going to continue. Commercially, higher utilization is likely to be seen on the higher quality and larger charging sites, whether fast, ultra rapid, or slow. I think we see confidence comes from drivers with sites where there's ample charging, and it's a very clear high quality solution. Drivers want that certainty, they want that familiarity amongst fair pricing and then the other such likes. Um, and then perhaps at the end of that sort of 5 years, or certainly moving, hopefully sooner. In my view, hopefully sooner. EV charging really, and we as an industry, we should all be hopefully making it blend seamlessly into the everyday, but also for us, it's about how might we enhance experiences through charging in unique locations. So, that might be as simple as enabling a booking facility, so that peace of mind is already created for a driver before they've arrived at the location, for example. But definitely blending EV charging seamlessly into everyday life should definitely be a goal.
Yeah, but a booking system would be very clever, actually.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's something we've been working on with a couple of our partners. So watch this space.
yeah, that would be wonderful, actually, knowing that you can go on your long journey and not get caught out by having to add precious time onto that. Okay, brilliant. So final question for you. And I've been thinking about what could we ask to sort of end this really interestingly. If you could change one thing, how the industry or the government is approaching EV infrastructure today, what would that be?
Yeah, good one. I'm probably going to be quite boring with this because it comes from what I've seen with the way that the start of my career was slightly curtailed by that policy uncertainty. Saw firsthand how those solar and anaerobic digestion industries started to stutter when they shouldn't have. So I would love to just ensure that everything that we're doing remains to be underpinned and propelled by certainty and policy at the central level, because everything else builds around that. Every industry is underpinned with policy. We're seeing conversations around how that might affect the AI kind of revolution that we're all starting to experience. And I think, again, with our industry, with such convergence of different
Mm.
voices from OEMs to energy to infrastructure to technology, policy really is the single thing that will tie these things together.
It can often be the catalyst, but it can often also be the final nail that no one wanted.
Yeah, it can be self-fulfilling either way. So keep certainty is definitely something we're pushing for.
Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think that what I'd love to do is circle back in sort of 12 months' time and see how things have developed with both Landsec and others. And what I'd also say to our listeners, definitely reach out to Neil. You can catch him on LinkedIn or even message me directly. I'm sure he and Raw would be interested to hear about any potential future partnerships for the business. But Neil, you've been a gent. You've been a true pleasure. And I really, really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Daniel. It's been great to talk to you and talk about a number of things I'm just really passionate about. So yeah, look forward to speaking again.
No, you can see that, and we look forward to see you evolve and succeed even more. So thank you for your time.
Thanks. Take care.